Good afternoon. My name is Brianna, and I'm one of the two people behind Sleepy Cat Stories. And today in this video, we're going to read the second chapter in Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Please check my previous video for the first chapter. I'm going to share my screen now so you can read along with me. So we're picking up from where we left off last week. This chapter is called Winter Days and Winter Nights. The first snow came and the bitter cold. Every morning, Pa took his gun and his traps and was gone all day in the big woods. Actually, let me pause right quick and close this window behind me. There we go. Now you can see a little bit better. Every morning, Pa took his gun and his traps and was gone for all day in the big woods, setting the small traps for muskrats and mink along the creeks, the middle-sized traps for foxes and wolves in the woods. He set out the big bear traps, hoping to get a nice fat bear before they all went into their dens for the winter. One morning he came back, took the horses and sled, and hurried away. He had shot a bear. Laura and Mary jumped up and down and clapped their hands. They were so glad. Mary shouted, "I want the drumstick! I want the drumstick!" But Mary did not know how big a bear's drumstick is. You think about if you've ever had fried chicken, how their drumsticks are about like this, and you can munch on it and go yum, 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 yum. Well, a bear's a lot bigger than a chicken, so I think Mary didn't really know what she was getting herself into with that one. When Pa came back, he had both a bear and a pig in the wagon. He had been going through the woods with the big bear trap in his hands and the gun on his shoulder when he walked around a big pine tree covered with snow, and the bear was standing behind the tree. The bear had just killed the pig and was picking it up to eat it. Pa said the bear was standing up on its hind legs, holding the pig in its paws, just as though they were hands. We've got a nice picture of drawing of this right here. We have Pa with his skin hat to keep his ears warm. We have this big pine tree, and then we have the bear and the pig. It looks kind of like a very little bear and a very little pig, but this is when we talk about scale in drawings. Drawings aren't always matched up to how things are sized in real life. If you look at a map, then it's matched up. But for drawings, sometimes if it looks small, it might not actually be small. And that's a difference between drawings and photographs. Okay, so we're going to jump back into the story. Pa shot the bear, and there was no way of knowing where the pig came from, nor whose pig it was. "So I just brought home the bacon," Pa said. There was plenty of fresh meat to last for a long time. The days and the nights were so cold that the pork in a box and the bear meat hanging in the little shed outside the back door were solidly frozen and didn't thaw. When Ma wanted fresh meat for dinner, Pa took the axe and cut off a chunk of frozen bear meat or pork. But the sausage balls or the salt pork or the smoked hams and the venisons, Ma could get for herself from the shed or from the attic. Again, they didn't have, refrigerators and freezers back in those days, but it was below freezing outside, so everything froze. So it was like all of outside was a freezer where they could keep their food. The snow kept coming until it was drifted and banked up against the house. That means like really, really, really big piles of snow. In the mornings, the window panes were covered with frost and beautiful pictures of trees and flowers and fairies. Ma said that Jack Frost came in the night and made the pictures while everybody was asleep. Laura thought that Jack Frost was a little man all snowy white, wearing a glittering white pointed cap and soft white knee boots made out of deerskin. His coat was white and his mittens were white, And he didn't carry a gun on his back, but in his hands he had shiny, sharp tools with which he carved the pictures. Laura and Mary were allowed to take Ma's thimble and make pretty patterns of circles in the frost on the glass. So you might not know what a thimble is. And if you do, well, you just get to learn again. So when you're sewing something by hand with a needle and thread, the needle is really sharp and you don't want to accidentally poke your finger because number one, that would hurt. And number two, you don't want to get blood on your fabric. So a thimble is like a little hat that your fingers wear made out of metal. So it's like a tiny little bucket that you put on your finger so you can sew and not poke your finger. So that's where they're getting all these little circles. When they put their mouth close to the pane and blew their breath on it, the white frost melted and ran in drops down the glass. Then they could see the drifts of snow outdoors and the great trees standing bare and black, making thin blue shadows on the white snow. Laura and Mary helped Ma with the work. Every morning, there were dishes to wipe. Mary wiped more of them than Laura because she was bigger, but Laura always wiped carefully her own little cup and plate. Since they didn't have a dishwasher like some people don't nowadays, you had to wash everything by hand. And since they didn't have a lot of money because they grew all their own food, each person had their own plate and cup, and so they reused it. By the time the dishes were all wiped and set away, the trundle bed was aired out. So we talked about what a trundle bed was in chapter 1, but as a reminder, it's like a little cushion bed that you slide under a bigger bed like we have nowadays so that kids can sleep on it so the parents don't have to buy a second bed for the kids. So standing on one on each side, Laura and Mary straightened the covers, tucked them in well at the foot and at the sides, plumped the pillows, and put them in place. Then Ma pushed the trundle bed into its place under the big bed. Here we've got a nice picture. Mary is the blonde girl with the green dress, and Laura has brown hair and kind of a light green dress. And they're plumping up the pillows like I just did with these on my couch, and they're making up their bed. After this was done, Ma began the work that belonged to that day. Each day had its own proper work. Ma used to say, wash on Sunday, iron on Tuesday, mend on Wednesday, mend on Wednesday, churn on Thursday, clean on Friday, bake on Saturday, rest on Sunday. Laura liked the churning and the baking days best of all the week. I think I would too, because butter's yummy and baked food is really yummy too. In the winter, the cream was not yellow as it was in summer, and butter churned from it was white and not so pretty. Ma liked everything on her table to be pretty, so in the wintertime, she colored the butter. So cream is like milk when it is another word for milk, when it's just come fresh out of the cow's body. And so you've got milk, but it's not really ready to drink yet. So nowadays, what we do to try and make sure it's extra clean and safe to drink is we boil that milk in case there's any germs or bugs in it. And then they separate out, how do I describe this? So the milk, when it comes out of the cow, has a lot of like creamy fat in it that's really yummy. And then it also has like thinner stuff, kind of like skim milk. And so they separate those two apart. And the thicker stuff, the fats, are what they squish with the butter churn and what they turn into butter. So that's actually how butter is made. Even if you're buying butter from the store, instead of making it out of cow's milk, that's how it's made, except it's made in a really, really big way instead of just one person with a butter churn. So we're going to talk more about churning butter. After she had put the cream in the tall crockery churn, so crockery is another word for pottery, and the churn is like kind of like a pitcher that you might have sweet tea in. So it's like this big around and this tall, and they put the milk in there. And so that's what they put the milk in so they can squish it a lot to turn it into butter. After she had put the cream in the tall crockery churn and set it near the stove to warm up, she washed and scraped a long orange colored carrot. Then she grated it on the bottom of the old leaky tin pan that Pa had punched full of nail holes for her. Because they didn't have like a food processor or they couldn't go buy grated carrots at the store. Ma rubbed the carrot across the roughness until she had rubbed it all through the holes, and when she lifted up the pan, there was a soft, juicy mound of grated carrot. She put this in a little pan of milk on the stove, and when the milk was hot, she poured milk and carrot into a cloth bag. Then she squeezed the bright yellow milk into the churn where it colored all the cream. Now the butter would be yellow, because they also didn't have food coloring back then, which is something your mommy or daddy might use when they're cooking. Laura and Mary were allowed to eat the carrot after the milk had been squeezed out. Mary thought she should have a larger share because she was older, and Laura said she should have it because she was littler. But Ma said they must divide it evenly. It was very good. When the cream was ready, Ma scalded the long wooden churn dash, put it in the churn, and dropped the wooden churn cover over it. Oops. There's our cat for this episode. He's going to go take a nap over here. So that's our sleepy cat sighting for today. So we were talking about a churn dash. So I mentioned squishing the butter or the milk to make it turn into butter. So a churn dash is a long piece of wood, kind of like a broom handle, and then that's what they actually put into the churn or the bowl, and they use that and move that with their hands to squish it a lot to turn the milk into butter. The churn cover it's talking about is a lid they put on top to keep it from going everywhere and making an awful mess. So here we go, we're going to jump back in. The churn cover had a little round hole in the middle, and Ma moved the dash, that's the stick we were talking about, up and down through the hole. She churned for a long time. Mary could sometimes churn while Ma rested, but the dash was too heavy for Laura. So here's a picture of Mary because she's got the blonde hair. This is that churn that I was talking about that's kind of like a big pitcher that's made out of pottery. This is the churn dash, or that big stick I was talking about that they use to squish the milk. Uh-oh, I hit a button. I hit a button. Where did it go? There it went. Silly me. So this right here, this lid is that churn cover that they were talking about that keeps the butter from going everywhere and making an awful mess. At first, the splashes of cream showed thick and smooth around the little hole. After a long time, they began to look grainy. Then Ma churned more slowly, and on the dash, there began to appear tiny grains of yellow butter. When Ma took the churn cover off, there was the butter in a golden lump, drowning in buttermilk. So you can actually get buttermilk at Kroger or at Publix or your grocery store nowadays even, but it tastes kind of sour. So when you take milk, when it comes out of the cow, and you put it in the churn and you squish it, the fats, which are the kind of oily parts that make your lips kind of smooth, they separate out from the rest of it, and the liquid that's left is called buttermilk. Personally, I don't like it, but that's because I didn't grow up drinking it. In the last video, I told you about my nanny Cheatwood, who is 93 or 94. I need to remember when her birthday is, and how she actually likes buttermilk because she grew up making butter and drinking it like this. We also talked about eating, different organs from animals like heart and liver and tongue, and how it's not really gross. It's just something we didn't grow up with. So I think you should try buttermilk sometime, but maybe only buy a little bitty container just in case you don't like it. So we're going to keep talking about making the butter. Then Ma took out the lump with the wooden paddle into a wooden bowl, and she washed it many times in cold water, turning it over and over and working it with the paddle until the water ran clear. After that, she salted it. Next came the best part of churning. Ma molded the butter. On the loose bottom of the wooden butter mold was carved the picture of a strawberry with 2 strawberry leaves. So we're learning a lot about making butter today. You should think about all this work that people had to do next time you get to eat butter on your broccoli or on your mac and cheese or your baked potato. So a butter mold is kind of like a pan that your mama or your dad might bake a cake in. It's a pan that they put the butter in and then they squish it down. And after it sits for a little bit, it becomes a lot harder and a lot more solid. And you can flip it over and it'll have a pretty design on it. And it'll be ready to use, just like the butter that you get from the store. So the butter that you get at the store was already put into a butter mold. With the paddle, Ma packed butter tightly into the mold until it was full. Then she turned it upside down over a plate and pushed on the handle of the loose bottom. The little firm pat of golden butter came out with the strawberry and its leaves molded on top. Laura and Mary watched, breathless, one on either side of Ma, while the little golden butter pats, each with its strawberry on top, dropped onto the plate as Ma put all the butter through the mold. Then Ma gave them each a drink of good, fresh buttermilk. On Saturdays, when Ma made the bread, they each got a little piece of dough to make into a little loaf. They might have a bit of cookie dough too, to make little cookies. And once Laura even made a pie in her patty pan. Patty pan is kind of a weird word, but it's kind of another word for a cake pan that you would use to make a cake or bread or cookies on in your oven. After the day's work was done, Ma sometimes cut out paper dolls for them. She cut the dolls out of stiff white paper and drew on the faces with a pencil. Then, from bits of colored paper, she cut dresses and hats and ribbons and lace so that Laura and Mary could dress their dolls beautifully. But the best time of all was at night when Pa came home. He would come in from his tramping through the snowy woods with tiny icicles hanging off the ends of his mustaches. Tramping is another word for kind of going hiking through the woods, tromping, 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 tromping. He would hang his gun up on the wall over the door, throw off his fur cap and coat and mittens, and call, "Where's my little half pint of sweet cider half drunk up?" That was Laura because she was so small. So it's kind of a funny word, but sweet cider, that's like apple juice. A half pint is about this half of the size of a regular glass that you would drink apple juice out of. And so it's kind of small, and then half drunk up. So there's only half of that. So he's calling her really little and really sweet. Laura and Mary would run to climb on his knees and sit there while he warmed himself up by the fire. Then he would put on his coat and cap and mittens again and go out to do the chores and bring in plenty of wood for the fire. Sometimes when Pa had walked his trap lines quickly because the traps were empty, or when he had gotten some game, we talked about that game means wild animals. When he had gotten some game or wild animals sooner than usual, he would come home early. Then he would have time to play with Laura and Mary. One game they loved was called Mad Dog. Pa would run his fingers through his thick brown hair, standing it all up on end. Isn't this silly? Then he'd drop down onto all fours and growling, "Arr, arr, arr." He chased Laura and Mary all around the room, trying to get them cornered where they couldn't get away. They were quick at dodging and running, but once he caught them against the wood box behind the stove, they couldn't get past Pa, and there was no other way out. See, we have a nice picture of this right here with Mary in the blue dress and Laura in the green dress. And here's Pa with all his messy hair. I don't have a beard, so I can't make it messy, but I can make my hair messy. Then Pa growled so terribly. His hair was so wild and his eyes so fierce that it all seemed real. Mary was so frightened that she couldn't move. But as Pa came nearer, Laura screamed, "Ah!" And with a wild leap and a scramble, she jumped over the wood box, dragging Mary with her. I'm going to put my hair up now. And at once, there was no mad dog at all. There was only Pa standing there with his blue eyes shining, looking at Laura. "Well," he said to her, "you're only a little half pint of cider half drunk up, but by jinks, you're as strong as a little French horse." So he's saying she's little, she's sweet, and she's very strong. "You shouldn't frighten the children so, Charles," Ma said. "Look how big their eyes are." Pa looked, and then he took down his fiddle. We said that a fiddle is another word for a violin. I'm trying to show you. So you would hold it under your chin and you would hold the end right here in your hand and you would play it like this. He began to play and sing. You may have heard the song before. It's called Yankee Doodle, but these are some verses that people don't usually get to sing. Yankee Doodle went to town. He wore his striped trousies. He swore he couldn't see the town. There were so many houses. Laura and Mary forgot all about the mad dog. And there he saw some great big guns, big as a log of maple. And every time they turned 'em round, it took 2 yoke of cattle. Yoke is another word for a pair of cattle. So 2 yokes, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 cows total. So those are very heavy guns. And every time they fired them off, it took a horn of powder. It made a noise like father's gun, only a nation louder. So we said Pa was using his gun to go hunting, and I made some sound effects like poof, poof. But this is even louder. It's like boom. So it's kind of loud. Pa was keeping time with his foot. That's when you clap to a song you're singing. And Laura clapped her hands to the music when he sang. And I'll sing Yankee Doodle Doo. Yeah, let me try that again. And I'll sing Yankee Doodle Dee-o, and I'll sing Yankee Doodle, and I'll sing Yankee Doodly-do, and I'll sing Yankee Doodle. All alone in the big woods in the snow and in the cold, the little log house was warm and snug and cozy. Ma and Pa and Mary and Laura and baby Carrie were comfortable and happy there, especially at night. Then the fire was shining on the hearth. That's another word for fireplace. The cold and the dark and the wild beasts were all shut out, and Jack, the brindle stripy bulldog, and Black Susan the cat lay blinking at the flames in the fireplace. Ma sat in her rocking chair, so she's rocking back and forth, sewing by the light of the lamp on the table. That was some of the candles that they made. And they also, I'm fixing to talk about it a little bit. In addition to making candles, they used gas lamps that burned something called kerosene. It's kind of like the gas that goes in your car. It's just really dangerous, really, which is why we don't use it now, because electric lights are a lot safer. So this was something they would use if they didn't have candles, or if they were lucky enough to be able to afford it, because some people couldn't. The lamp was bright and shiny. There was salt in the bottom of its glass bowl with the kerosene. The kerosene's the gas, to keep the kerosene from exploding. And there were bits of red flannel. Flannel's another word for cloth. So little bits of red cloth among the salt to make it really pretty. It was very pretty. Laura loved to look at the lamp with its glass chimney so clean and sparkling, its yellow flames burning so steadily, that means burning without stopping, and its bowl of clear kerosene colored red by the bits of flannel. She loved to look at the fire in the fireplace, flickering and changing all the time, burning yellow and red and sometimes green above the logs, and hovering blue over the golden and ruby coals. And then Pa told stories. When Laura and Mary begged him for a story, he would take them on his knees, so he's got one little girl sitting on each knee, and tickle their faces with his long whiskers until they laughed aloud. His eyes were blue and merry. One night, Pa looked at Black Susan, stretching herself. Oh, we said Black Susan is their cat. So stretching herself before the fire and running her claws out and in. And he said, "Do you know that a panther is a cat? A great big wild cat?" "No," said Laura. "Well, it is," said Pa. "Just imagine Black Susan bigger than Jack and fiercer than Jack when he growls. Then she would be just like a panther." He settled Laura and Mary more comfortably on his knees, and he said, "I'll tell you about Grandpa and the panther." "Your grandpa?" Laura asked. "No, Laura, your grandpa, my father." "Oh," said Laura, and she wriggled closer against Pa's arm. Just the camera. She knew her grandpa. He lived far away in the big woods in a big log house. Pa began, "The story of Grandpa and the panther. Your grandpa went to town one day and was late starting home. It was dark when he came riding his horse through the big woods, so dark that he could hardly see the road. And when he heard a panther scream, he was frightened, for he had no gun." Now, some of you might be wondering, how does a panther scream? Well, Laura's about to ask that question for us. "How does a panther scream?" Laura asked. "Like a woman," said Pa, "like this." And then he screamed so that Laura and Mary shivered with terror. So that's like, "Ah!" Ma jumped in her chair and said, "Mercy, Charles." But Laura and Mary loved to be scared like that. The horse, with Grandpa on him, ran fast, for he was frightened too, but it could not get away from the panther. It was a very hungry panther, and it came as fast as the horse could run. It screamed, "Ah!" now on this side of the road, now on the other side, and it was always close behind. Grandpa leaned forward in the saddle and urged the horse to run faster. But the horse was running as fast as it could possibly run. And still the panther screamed close behind. "Ah!" Then Grandpa caught a glimpse of it as it leaped from treetop to treetop almost overhead. It was a huge black panther, leaping through the air like Black Susan leaping on a mouse. It was many, many times bigger than Black Susan. It was so big that if it leapt on Grandpa, it could kill him with his enormous slashing claws and his long, sharp teeth. I'm going to pause the story here. Some of you might have seen Black Panther, the superhero, and with Wakanda Forever and everything. And that's actually what the superhero Black Panther is based on this type of Black Panther. So you can tell that they wanted it to be kind of scary and impressive. Gonna jump back into the story now. Grandpa, on his horse, was running away from it just the way a mouse runs from a cat. The panther didn't scream anymore. Grandpa didn't see it anymore, but he knew that it was coming, leaping after him in the dark woods behind him. The horse ran with all its might. We've got a nice drawing of it right here. And remember, we talked about scale, and sometimes drawings, some things are smaller than they should be in the real world, and some things are bigger. But you can kind of see this is a pretty big panther if this is a horse with Grandpa on it. So horses can weigh a lot. They can weigh, I'd say, probably 5 times as much as your dad, if your dad's a little bit chubby, or about half as much as your car. And panthers While they don't weigh as much as a horse, they're a lot stronger. They have a lot more muscles and a lot more slashy claws because horses don't have claws. So panthers are about the size of probably two of your parents or both of your parents put together. So now we kind of know about horses and panthers. I'm going to jump back into the story now. At last, the horse ran up to Grandpa's house. Grandpa saw the panther springing. That means getting ready to jump. Grandpa jumped off the horse against the door. He burst through the door and slammed it behind him. The panther landed on the horse's back, just where Grandpa had been. Poor horsey. Oh no, I'm kind of worried now, but it'll be okay. The horse screamed, "Nee!" and ran. He was running away into the big woods, with the panther riding on his back and ripping his back with his claws. But Grandpa grabbed the gun off the wall and got to the window just in time to shoot the panther dead. Grandpa said he would never again go into the big woods without his gun. So everything was okay for the horse in the end. He was scared, but he was okay, and he was well loved and taken care of. When Pa told the story, Laura and Mary shivered and snuggled closer to him. They were safe and snug on his knees with his strong arms around them. They liked to be there before the warm fire with Black Susan purring on the hearth and good dog Jack stretched out beside her. When they heard a wolf howl, "Oh!" Jack's head lifted and his hairs rose stiff along his back. But Laura and Mary listened to that lonely sound in the dark and cold of the big woods, and they were not afraid. They were cozy and comfortable in their little house made of logs, with the snow drifted around it and the wind crying because it could not get in by the fire. That's the end of chapter 2. I will be reading chapter 3 for you soon, so make sure you come back and look for this channel. It's called Sleepy Cat Stories. My name is Brianna, and I get to read books to you because I like books, and I think everybody should have the chance to read and to hear good stories. Please come read with me next time, okay? Oops, I'm having trouble figuring out Zoom, so just a second. There we go. Bye-bye, everyone. See you later.